In this video, I'm going to explore a question that might have crossed your mind while watching the destruction of Isengard, but one that isn't directly addressed in the films. Those who've only experienced the movies might find this analysis particularly fascinating, as it reveals layers of strategy and magical theory that aren't explicitly shown on screen. I hope this deep dive into Middle-earth's magical mechanics proves both enlightening and entertaining. Let's begin. When we witness the Ents marching on Isengard, we see Saruman's tower surrounded by an army of ancient tree shepherds bent on revenge. The White Wizard watches from his tower as these massive beings systematically destroy his stronghold, tear apart his war machines, and flood his entire fortress. Yet throughout this entire assault, Saruman never once attempts to use his considerable magical powers to defend himself or strike back at the Ents. This raises a compelling question that deserves careful examination. To understand why Saruman didn't unleash magical attacks against the Ents, we need to first grasp the nature of wizardly power in Tolkien's universe. The Istari, as they're properly called, weren't sent to Middle-earth as conquerors wielding unlimited magical force. Their mission came with specific restrictions and guidelines that fundamentally shaped how limitations weren't just they could operate. These suggestions or moral guidelines, but actual constraints placed upon their incarnated forms by higher powers. The wizards were explicitly forbidden from matching power with power or using force to dominate the wills of the free peoples. This restriction extended to their interactions with all of Middle-earth's inhabitants, including the Ents. When Saruman chose the path of corruption and began serving his own ambitions' rather original mission than his, he didn't suddenly gain the ability to ignore these fundamental limitations. The constraints remained in place regardless of his moral transformation. But there's another crucial factor at play here. The Ents aren't ordinary creatures that can be easily manipulated or destroyed through conventional magical means. These ancient beings are among the oldest living things in Middle-earth, created by Yavanna herself to be the guardians and shepherds of the forests. Their very essence is tied to the natural world in ways that make them remarkably resistant to the kind of corruption and domination that Saruman excelled at using against men and orcs. Consider how Saruman's power typically manifested throughout the story. His greatest weapons were his voice of persuasion, his ability to corrupt and manipulate others, and his talent for turning people against each other. These tools worked wonderfully on beings with complex emotions, political motivations, and personal desires. But the Ents operated from a fundamentally different perspective, driven by ancient purposes and deep connections to the natural world that couldn't be swayed by honeyed words or false promises. Furthermore, the Ents' attack on Isengard wasn't just a military assault, it was an act of natural justice. Saruman had committed crimes against the forest itself, destroying countless trees to fuel his war machine and industrial expansion. The Ents' wrath represented the Earth's own response to this violation, making their assault something far more profound than a simple battle between opposing forces. The magical dynamics involved here go beyond simple combat effectiveness. When we examine the deeper mechanics of power in Middle-earth, we begin to see why Saruman's usual methods would prove utterly ineffective against these particular opponents. The Ents possessed an inherent magical resistance that stemmed from their very creation and purpose. Unlike men, or even elves, who could be influenced through appeals to fear, ambition, or desire, the Ents were fundamentally immune to such manipulation. Their minds operated on timescales that spanned millennia, making them nearly impossible to sway with immediate concerns or temporary promises. When Saruman looked down from his tower at these ancient guardians, he was facing beings whose magical nature was in many ways opposite to his own. There's also the matter of magical energy and its application in combat situations. Saruman's powers were primarily focused on corruption, influence, and industrial creation rather than direct destructive force. His magic worked best through gradual influence over time, building networks of control and dependency. The kind of immediate, overwhelming magical assault that would be needed to stop an army of Ents simply wasn't within his particular skill set or permitted under the constraints of his incarnation. The flooding of Isengard presents another fascinating aspect of this magical dynamic. The Ents didn't just attack with brute force, they redirected the natural flow of water to accomplish their goals. This represented a form of magic that worked in harmony with natural forces rather than against them. For Saruman to counter such an approach, he would need to work against the fundamental forces of nature itself, something that would require far more power than he possessed in his incarnated form. So when we see Saruman standing helpless in his tower as the Ents destroy everything he built, we're witnessing the inevitable result of these combined factors: his magical limitations, the Ents' unique nature, and the fundamental mismatch between his abilities and their assault created a situation where the White Wizard truly had no effective response. The destruction of Isengard wasn't just a military victory, it was a demonstration of how even the most powerful beings in Middle-earth remain bound by the deeper laws that govern their existence.